Today, on Capitol Hill, a familiar argument over deficits, taxes, and who really pays the price took center stage. But this exchange went deeper than political talking points. It cut straight into the math behind Washington's promises and the lived reality for millions of Americans. If you care about where your tax dollars go and how policy decisions shape everyday life, this is one you will want to understand. Before we get into it, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you do not miss clear, fact-driven breakdowns like this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming in today, and thanks for having this hearing. Secretary Bessent, the last time you were here, I asked you about your emphasis on domestic discretionary funding in your opening statement. You had stated, quote, "We must adjust federal domestic discretionary spending to get our fiscal house in order while striking an urgent tone on our growing deficit." I mentioned to you then that domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of our budget. And I think if you were serious about deficit reduction, you might not push for tax cuts that almost certainly could not be offset by discretionary adjustments alone. And now, of course, we know you can't. Today, we actually have the details of your plan. Take health care from 10 million Americans, 126,000 Coloradans. Cut nutrition assistance for millions of adults. Sunset clean energy investments that are so critical to the American West. Give over 40% of the tax benefits of this bill to the top 5%. And it's not even close to being paid for. Even my colleagues on the Republican side, who for years and years and years have claimed to be the fiscally responsible party, now are admitting that it's not paid for. This bill adds another $2.4 trillion to our national debt. It will push the deficit to GDP ratio up to 7%, which you said when you were here before was unsustainable, far from the 3% target that you describe. If you look at your proposals taken together, there is no getting around the fact. There is no getting around the fact that the richest Americans receive an average tax cut of $300,000, which again, we're not paying for with the discretionary cuts that you advertise. So once again, we will have to borrow money in order to assist the people in this country who least need a tax cut at this moment, while the Americans who have been made miserable by the economy that they're in actually see income reduced because of cuts to Medicaid and cuts to SNAP. Meanwhile, and I think, Mr. Chairman, this is really important, meanwhile, interest rates are at 20-year highs. Moody's has slashed our credit rating because of the fiscal irresponsibility of this administration. The World Bank has cut our growth estimates in half, and the bond markets are screaming at us to stop. We now pay, and we are paying this year, more in interest than we are in the national defense. Secretary Bessent, how can you square your concern with fiscal health with deficit finance growth for families that need those tax cuts least?
Senator, I'll begin with that we did not get here. We inherited this fiscal situation that I believe.
Well, you inherited from Donald Trump, who was here. You did, Mr. Bessent.
No,
yes,
sir.
you did, Mr. Bessent.
No,
you inherited from Donald Trump. He's the first president to come back after a 4-year hiatus, after we know exactly what the last tax cuts did, which was blow a massive hole in our deficit and debt. You can't sit here and lie about that. It's true. The data, to coin a phrase, the data shows that that's the result. The math shows that that is the result. No one on this side of the aisle admits anymore that or claims anymore that they didn't blow a huge hole in the deficit. They did. And now you're here saying to the American people, let's double down on that. We're going to give tax cuts for the wealthy. We are going to give tax cuts again to the wealthiest people in America, and we are going to finance it on the backs of the sons and daughters of teachers and firefighters and police officers all over this country, because we can't pay for it. Because the Treasury Secretary discovered somehow that domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of the budget, and therefore you can't balance it there.
Well, sir, we had a referendum on November 5th.
You certainly did. I agree with
policies. Your side lost.
I agree with that.
And a higher decibel level.
And I'm a rare Democrat who doesn't blame Donald Trump for winning. I'm sad he won. I don't blame him for winning. But don't come here.
In your statements,
go ahead.
They have veracity.
Go ahead, Mr. Secretary. What?
Higher decibel level does not give your statements more veracity.
My statements are true, if that's the word, if that's what you mean by veracity. My statements are true. You blew a massive hole in the deficit when your predecessor was sitting here under Donald Trump. And so the question is, can't we think of something better to do with the money than this debt, than drive up interest rates by borrowing money from our kids so the richest people in America can get a tax cut when they don't need it? That is the reality of your plan.
Well, sir, actually the high interest rates were achieved during the Biden administration in October of 2023, and we have not touched those rates since then. So
the higher interest rates.
No, your statement's incorrect.
I'm out of time, and I appreciate the indulgence of the chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
During today's hearing, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was pressed on a contradiction that has been quietly growing inside the administration's economic agenda. On paper, the message sounds disciplined: cut spending, get the fiscal house in order, strike an urgent tone about the deficit. But when you zoom in, the numbers tell a very different story. The lawmakers speaking reminded viewers of something that rarely makes headlines: domestic discretionary spending, the part of the budget that funds things like education, housing programs, scientific research, environmental protection, and many public services people rely on, makes up only about 15% of total federal spending. That means even if you slashed it aggressively, it simply cannot cover the cost of massive tax cuts. The math does not work. And now, with the details of the plan finally public, the consequences are clearer. Under this proposal, an estimated 10 million Americans could lose healthcare coverage. For Colorado alone, that number is about 126,000 people. Nutrition assistance would be reduced for millions of adults, affecting families who already struggle with rising food prices. Clean energy investments, especially important for Western states dealing with drought, wildfires, and energy transitions, would be allowed to expire. At the same time, more than 40% of the tax benefits in this bill would go to the top 5% of earners. That is not a rounding error. That is a design choice. And crucially, the bill is not paid for. Even lawmakers on the Republican side, many of whom have spent years branding themselves as the party of fiscal responsibility, are now acknowledging this reality. According to nonpartisan estimates, the plan would add roughly $2.4 trillion to the national debt. It would push the deficit to GDP ratio to around 7%, more than double the 3% target Secretary Bessent himself previously described as sustainable. Here is the key takeaway for viewers at home. This debate is not just about spending versus taxes in the abstract. It is about trade-offs. When policymakers say they are tightening the belt, you have to ask, whose belt? Under this plan, the richest Americans would receive an average tax cut of about $300,000. That benefit is not offset by trimming waste or closing loopholes alone. It is offset by cutting health care, food assistance, and long-term investments that affect working families and future growth. This is where understanding the budget matters. Mandatory spending, like Social Security and Medicare, makes up the largest share of federal outlays. Discretionary spending is the smallest slice. So when leaders focus their deficit rhetoric almost exclusively on that smaller slice, it signals that deficit reduction may not be the real priority. Shifting benefits may be. As this debate continues, remember that deficits are not just numbers on a chart. They reflect choices about who is protected, who is exposed, and who is asked to sacrifice. If you want more breakdowns that go beyond the sound bites and help you actually understand what is happening in Washington, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. We will keep unpacking the policies that shape your life, whether politicians want you to look closely or not.